Here's Sims. It's a good serve this from Southampton. They could finish the job here. It's Shane Long, and he has done it! Just a minute to play. Plus stoppage time. Here's Letizia! Who better to say farewell than one of the finest players ever to wear the red and white?
Hello and welcome. It is episode 73 of the Saints FC podcast. I am John Bailey and I am delighted to be welcoming back Carl Anka. Carl, you caused an absolute storm for me last time you were on. Everyone enjoyed hearing you for the first time on the Saints FC podcast, hearing your insight on Saints. So, you know, you've had the brilliant first album. This is your second album. This is the challenging piece for you now, Carl. How are you feeling before it?
During the international break, just a little bit scared, but Let's give it a go.
Okay. Welcome back, Carl. Thank you very much for coming on again. Obviously, Saints fans, if you're hearing Carl for the first time and you like what you hear, the best place to hear from Carl is on the Athletic website or kind of content app, where Carl does a dedicated story on Southampton Football Club, probably 2 or 3 times a week on average, but really, really good stuff. And we're gonna speak to Carl about some of those pieces as we go through this episode. And you might also occasionally hear him talking on the Totally Football Show as well, with James Richardson. Carl, how have you been? So I think we've had about 4 or 5 games since we last spoke. All of them losses apart from one very, very important one. Yes.
Should we start there? Bloody hell.
I think
South
we should
Coast
start
derby.
there. Yeah, exactly.
That was unlike
it was
something
great.
I've ever experienced before in my life. I have never heard a noise like that in a football ground before. I have never been in a police kettle like that before. And I've never heard chants that loud before in a long, long time. I think so. That was the game on Tuesday, and I spent most of Wednesday indoors with all the curtains drawn because I had a splitting headache in a good way, like a well-earned headache.
Oh wow. I mean, you've obviously been a very good boy if you've not managed to be kettled by the police before, Carl. That's good effort. I mean, let's start with the South Coast derby because it's probably been the only good thing that's happened for Southampton in the last month. So it's a good place for us to start. I wonder what derbies have you been to before? What games have you been to where you kind of previously had that experience of thinking, wow, what an atmosphere this is?
I've done mostly Tottenham derbies based on my dad's history as a Tottenham fan. So I've done Tottenham West Ham and I've done a North London derby. So I've heard vitriol and I've heard a bad chant or two.
Yeah.
But in terms of just constant singing and this, I've never seen a team continue to sing about why their team is great when they were 3-0 down in the same way I've heard Portsmouth fans sing about that. So that was a unique experience for me.
Yeah. I mean, it is an absolutely raucous atmosphere, Southampton, Portsmouth. I've never qualified to get a ticket at Fratton Park, so I can't speak for those ones, but the ones at St Mary's, which I wouldn't say necessarily is a ground famous for its atmosphere, even that manages still to become kind of like raucous and enlivened by the sense of the occasion. And I've been to a few derbies before. I grew up in the West Country. I've seen Bristol Rovers, Bristol City. That was pretty good. I saw that in an old terrace ground, and that was good fun. And I've also amazingly seen Brazil versus Argentina, which was a great atmosphere, but they don't really do away fans in South America in the same way. So it doesn't have quite that same level of febrile vitriol, which is just so fun. And actually, my experience from going to the Bristol derby in the old grounds is that it probably is even more impressive going to see it at Fratton Park, where it is that old school football ground, the fans on top of the pitch. Everything's a little bit rickety and feels a little bit more awkward and nerve-wracking, I suppose.
Yeah. The press box. I put press box in air quotes at Fratton Park was a quite intimate experience as well. I remember getting quite embarrassed when I had to run off to the toilet at half time because it was very much like trying to go into an old theatre seat. You sort of have to go through 4 or 5 individuals saying sorry the entire time before you get back into your seat. Fratton Park is, capital letters, a proper football ground. And the delight Southampton fans had after victory will live long in the memory. The fact that they're still singing 4-0 in your own home ground, Southampton Fans, lets me know they'll probably be singing that for another decade or so. Because I think that's another unique thing about the South Coast Derby. Because the game is played so infrequently, there's not a chance for bragging rights to reverse for quite a while. So congrats to Southampton. They're going to enjoy that for a long time. And fair play. They were very good in that game once they realised all Portsmouth had was like a bad atmosphere. Well, and all Portsmouth had to offer was an intense atmosphere and some interesting tackles. But that's the cup, and now we've got to look into league performance, which has been tricky, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, should we say? I mean, how did that derby compare to the other? I'm going to use the word derby and kind of like floating air brackets here. The other derby against Bournemouth, because I mean, from the footballing side of you, I think this is quite an interesting game, and maybe we can have a little chat about that. But I mean, just in case there are any Bournemouth fans listening to this, can you tell what the difference is between which one means a lot to the team and which one doesn't?
Yeah, it was like night and day. So obviously the Athletic has a reporter for every single Premier League club. So the Athletic's Bournemouth writer, Peter Rutzler, met me on a Friday and wanted to talk to me about Bournemouth and how Bournemouth were taking that cup, that game against Southampton quite seriously. I wanted it to be their own derby. I wanted it to be their own, Eddie Howard yet to taste victory at St Mary's. And they were taking that very, very seriously. You go in the stadium and Southampton fans were more or less just, okay, well, this is a game before the real South Coast derby. And that was pretty much the feeling. It was annoying. Southampton fans were annoyed at the performance. I think the first 45 minutes against Bournemouth was maybe the poorest 45 minutes Southampton have had all season. But the overwhelming consensus after the game was sort of, let's draw a line under it. Let's beat Portsmouth, and then we'll take it from there. One of the big stories, of course, of the Bournemouth game was the return of Ryan Bertrand. Came on the second half and played at left back. Hopefully, he will remain the first choice left back going forward because he's the best player they've got at left back, really.
Well, I mean, we don't even really have another player at left back, which makes it all the more bizarre that Ryan Bertrand was, I suppose, overlooked for the start of the season. I know we had some talk about an injury, but certainly against Bournemouth, he looked absolutely fine when he came on. Yeah,
there's been some interesting tinkering and tactical profiles from Hasenhuttl, and there have been 2 or 3 player combinations that we haven't yet seen from Southampton that are either due to injury or to reasons I cannot fathom yet because I don't spend every day in Staplewood, that I still really want to see. So Southampton haven't had a particularly good recent run of form, but I don't think things are as bad as the league table suggests. I think there is a good first 11 that is not far off top half quality that is yet to be filled for Southampton, and I'd like to see it in the immediate next couple of weeks before I start getting worried and mentioning the R word.
Okay, yeah, I just don't want to think about that again. It's been a horrible past couple of years, and if we can avoid that R word as much as possible, that would be great. Although if you look at the Premier League table today, it's not pretty viewing for Saints fans. And I was speaking to, I don't know, is it a colleague, if they're from a kind of rival teams podcast earlier today. I was chatting to Sam from the Wolves podcast, and just saying to him how I think we started the season feeling really kind of confident, really feeling like we've got the right manager. The performances have been getting better at the end of last season, and I think we were expecting a much stronger start to the season. And I think a lot of us, I think, are kind of probably standing around scratching our heads and trying to work out what it is that's going wrong. Is it Ralph? Is he having a rude awakening that there's not really much time for learning on the job in the Premier League, and not actually you can't get away with experimenting all the time? I'm quite confused as to why it's not working, because I watch us in the games and I can see what he's trying to do, and I can see it sometimes, certainly with the high press, sometimes working, and you see us getting chances. And then there's just these moments where we seem to have totally lost concentration, totally lost any sort of shape or any sense of what we're supposed to be doing. And Carl, I'm hoping that you can shed some light on that, because I'm sat here confused and a bit disappointed, really.
I think a key thing to remember is, well, Hasenhuttl is a good manager, one of the most promising. I keep wanting to call him a promising young manager, but then I'm reminded of his age, so I feel a bit mean. Let's be clear. Ralph Hasenhuttl is one of the most promising managers in Europe right now. He's got Champions League experience. He was schooled in a Red Bull system. He wants to play football in a very certain way that relies on a lot of video analysis, young players, preferably on the age of 24, and that revolves around this high pressing system that sometimes plays a 4-2-2-2-2, but can play 3 or 4 other formations at a moment's notice. Those things haven't changed. The mini run Southampton had last season after Hasenhuttl came in and when they were mathematically safe was the pinnacle. So if you take that, the amount of points they got over that space of time between December to April, I think if you extrapolate that across 38 games, it more or less works out to 52 points, which would have taken to 9th place last season. So that was, I think, the hope before the start of the season was, so Hasenhuttl gets his first preseason under his belt. Everyone gets to play more of this high-pressing system, and Southampton will be aiming for anywhere between 9th and 14th place in the league. I predicted Southampton to finish 12th, and I think everyone was feeling pretty happy going into that first game at Turf Moor against Burnley. And then, of course, Sean Dyche does what Sean Dyche does, which is score 3 goals and 3 shots, and you're a bit, oh no. All the good things about Southampton are still there. They're still trying to play young players in this tactically fluid system that sometimes plays a 4-2-2-2-2, and Hasenhuttl wants them to play high-pressing football. That is all still there. What is also apparent is all the things that were there from Pellegrino's tenure, and also Mark Hughes' tenure. So there is a vulnerability at set pieces. There is this frustrating inability to finish the chances you make. So Southampton are top 5, top 6 for XG in the Premier League right now. They make chances at a rate that a Europa League club would be proud of. They finish chances at a rate a relegation side would be embarrassed about. It is really, really annoying. And that speaks to more or less Southampton still haven't properly replaced Graziano Pelle, and to a lesser degree haven't replaced Sadio Mane. Moussa Djenepo looks to be on the way of replacing Sadio Mane. But in terms of a robust number 9 target man, that still remains to be seen, especially when you consider how many direct balls Hasenhuttl wants to play. It does make you scratch your head why they didn't try and get a taller striker. So that's up front. And then obviously the problem with Southampton is, while the attack has been the same and has been quite mediocre since Pelle left, the defence has got progressively worse following the sales of Font and Van Dijk. And the defence is going to cough up chances all the time in a way that I can't really explain other than individual mistakes. There's being bad and there's being unlucky, and Southampton's defence is both
bad and unlucky.
It is both at times that I can find absolutely baffling. So to bring up the Chelsea game, Tammy Abraham's first goal is unlucky defending. That is a ball over the top. That is Angus Gunn racing out of goal, and Tammy Abraham going, I'm going to try and chip you now because I've scored quite a few goals this season. And it gets in before Yoshida or Benerick can clear the ball off the line. That's unlucky. That's a goalkeeper deciding to roll the dice and then trying to make a save and then not coming off.
Yeah.
The defending for the third goal from N'Golo Kante, the third goal in Mason Mount and N'Golo Kante's goals, that's bad defending. That is simply being caught out by 2 or 3 slick passes and not understanding what's going on.
Yeah,
N'Golo Kante's one was particularly bad defending, where sort of before the setup, Danny Ings and Romeo had got a turnover, looked to be starting a counter-attack, then got dispossessed. They gave the ball to Willian, who swiftly moved the ball out wide, who then gave it to Kante. Kante was in acres of space, and Kante went, I'm going to have a shot now. There was no pressure on the ball when Kante made the shot, and then the shot was deflected. So that was a weird combination of bad and unlucky defending, because so it was bad defending and that no one was around to put pressure on Kante, unlucky that the shot took a deflection before it went in. So I don't know how Hasenhuttl fixes that. He seems to be working on, he's tried 3 at the back. He's tried 4 at the back. I'd really, really like to see him try 4 at the back with Bertrand left back, Valerie right back, and then Danzo and Benerick as your centre back options. I'm about to sneeze.
Bless you. Well, your sneeze there, Cole, maybe that's a good opportunity for me to jump in here and ask a question, because the next question I had for you lined up, and you've moved on to the topic kind of without me even sending you an agenda, so well done for doing that, was to ask you about these defensive lineups, which have been very odd. And we spoke a bit about Kevin Danso last time. He had quite an interesting and quite enthusing performance, I thought, against Manchester United, which was the last time we spoke. What's happening here? Because I thought, Danso was going to be a first choice centre back, and certainly that's what you thought about a month ago, alongside Jan Bednarek, with perhaps the right and the left back being a little bit less certain.
Yeah, he had a really shaky performance against Bournemouth, so he was tried out at right back against Bournemouth with Cedric at left back as a back. I want to say it was a 4-2-2-2, and it just didn't work. Felt bad to have that red card against Manchester United because it was perhaps a rash challenge that happens to young defenders, and he said he probably should have taken Danzo off when it was on a yellow card. And he said, but he also reiterated the fact that he believed Danzo's best position to be at centre back, and we all believe that Danzo's best position. I say we all. It is the common view of those at Southampton and football writers on the circuit that Kevin Danzo's best position is centre back. There was a very interesting comment from his former youth coach Dan Misch, who is now at Arsenal on the 17s, who thinks he potentially has a future at box-to-box midfielder, but for the general view is he's a centre back. So he's played left back and right back now, and he was really shaky at right back. Came off at half time as Bertrand came on at left back and said it move over to the right, and he hasn't featured for Southampton since. I've bumped into Danzo 2 or 3 times now at Staplewood, and he seems to be in fine spirit. He doesn't seem to be particularly concerned, or he doesn't seem to give any indication that he's been dropped. He's a lovely young man, a very much a professional, and I believe Hasenhuttl is a manager who communicates with his players very clearly when and why they are not featuring in the team as well. So I don't think there's any. I wouldn't want to comment on anyone to believe there's any sort of bad blood or he's been dropped. I simply believe it's a case of, especially in games where Southampton have a very unforgiving fixture list at the moment. And I think Hasenhuttl, especially in the bigger games, wants to go with experience over youth, which meant the return of Maya Yoshida, in particular in the games against Tottenham Hotspur and against Chelsea. I think if once the fixture list gets a bit kinder and there are less top 6 sides to play, I expect Kevin Danzo to be returning to the back line quite soon. And one thing that is for sure is basically Jan Bednarek is the ever-present of Southampton's defence. He's started every Premier League game under Ralph Hasenhuttl. So all 31 games Hasenhuttl has had in the Premier League, Jan Bednarek's been starting. So it's a case of if they play 4 at the back, who's going to partner him, or if it's 3 at the back, who's going to be the extra person along with Bednarek. And I'm going to say Yoshida, because Yoshida seems to be getting the nod in this back 3 as well. Vestergaard was dropped against Chelsea in an interesting tactical tweak. I'm still unclear as to whether or not it was just a tactical tweak or if he was potentially injured. but I think we might be beginning to see the tailing off of Vestergaard, especially if they continue with the back four.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a shame because I don't know. Vestergaard is one of those players, and I watch him and I want him to be better than he is, but I just can't see it happening. Whereas Bednarek, I think the first time I saw him, in fact, I think it was a game against Wolves when they were still in the Championship in the Cup, and he was pretty dreadful in that game. But you know, as he started to come into the team more, you could see that there was a really good centre back in Jan Bednarek, and I just can't see it in Vestergaard. And it pains me to say it because it's another example of a big load of money that Southampton have wasted on a defender that we thought was going to be really good and has turned out not to be. And I'm just hoping that Kevin Danso is going to be the real deal. It's interesting what you say about his former youth coach saying that he could have been a box to box midfielder as well, because I always felt like with Jack Stevens, who's another kind of much maligned Southampton centre back, that he would have been much better as either a defensive midfielder or a box to box midfielder. He had great passing range, but just terrible defending. So funny to see these sorts of things happening. The other thing which I've noticed, which doesn't really seem to make any sense, is that we really seem to be missing Moussa Djenepo, which is really odd as he's only played a handful of games. And you've already mentioned him in this podcast. What is it about him that we're just so lacking in all the other players in the first team squad?
He doesn't hesitate. It feels like a very simple way to describe a player, but there is something to be said about a player who constantly wants to pass the ball forward and constantly wants to get forward and get touches within the box. So, as I mentioned before, Southampton have a really bad problem with converting their chances. They're very often, you can see it, especially on counter-attacks, where, a lot of the play revolves around Nathan Redmond, who was Southampton's top scorer last season and very much has shouldered the responsibility of carrying Southampton's attack. So Redmond is a very, very impressive attacking midfielder. Sometimes his pass selection can annoy, so he sometimes shoots when I would prefer him to pass, and sometimes he passes maybe 2 or 3 seconds after I think he should pass as well. And that's not a problem. That's very much what a player who scored the most amount of goals and got the most amount of assists for Southampton had to do. It was just sort of last season, it's my responsibility to get goals here, so I'm going to take that responsibility and do what I need to do. But outside that, you can see very hesitant play from Southampton. Very often, players going forward take 2 or 3 touches when they should be taking 1, or there's a real lack of near post runs on crosses, which is one of those things that sounds really simple, but not many clubs have players who constantly make near post runs, because it's a high end attacking skill. One only has to look at what's going on at Manchester United with Marcus Rashford right now to see that having a striker who doesn't always make near post runs doesn't necessarily mean you're doomed to whatnot. Loads of teams have problems with this. So those are problems that are going on. And Moussa Djenepo basically simply doesn't have that, maybe you want to call it the yips or the fear or whatnot, but you look at his goals against Brighton and against Sheffield United, and that's instinctual play. That is a guy going, I'm trying to get from point A to B, regardless, I'm going to try and put the ball in the net, which you can coach it to a bit, but also a lot of it relies on you just growing up in the right circumstances and having the right amount of confidence to go, I'm having this. Moussa Djenepo's goal against Sheffield United was voted goal of the month for September. I honestly could not coach that goal. I have no idea how you would begin to coach that goal. Shrugging off a defender, moving it from left to right foot when you were going through a corridor of uncertainty, putting it back on your right foot again, and then getting a shot away. Remarkable talent, remarkable poise and balance and whatnot. And that takes supreme confidence in a way that, especially for some of the Southampton players that have been playing through the last 2 or 3 relegation seasons, a confidence that hasn't been there for a while.
Yeah, I'd agree with your summary there. That goal was a thing of beauty. It's funny because just the way you were describing what Djenepo does there is kind of how I feel about Josh Sims. You wrote an article about which I think was out yesterday or the day before yesterday, and you know, at the Saints FC podcast, kind of our unofficial title is almost the Josh Sims Fan Club. He's a player who every time I see him on the pitch, he just seems to enliven the game. He has, you know, those qualities that you're talking about, Djenepo. He looks up, he goes forward with pace, he doesn't hesitate. Sure, there's loads of stuff he doesn't get right, and he clearly doesn't quite have the quality of Djenepo yet. But he's a player that I always enjoy watching, just because I think kind of when he first came into the team was under Claude Puel, and that was a time when we were so ponderous about absolutely everything that we did, that seeing Josh Sims pick up the ball and just run towards the opposition goal was something that we just hadn't seen for a whole year, basically. So I was going to speak about Josh Sims towards the end of the podcast, but seeing as I've brought him up now, do you see that link between Sims and Djenepo, or am I just totally insane and just, you know, loving Josh Sims through a total irrational sort of rose-tinted glasses, as it were?
In all honesty, I've not seen particularly much of Josh Sims in my time. Obviously, because I've only been at Southampton at the start of this season, so I can't say I'm the most au fait with Sims's play. He did have two very impressive performances last season, especially when he came on as a substitute against Tottenham Hotspur in that smash and grab victory Southampton got near the tail end last season with the James Ward-Prowse free kick. And I think Jan Valery scored in that game as well. He also was really impressive against Wolves. From what I have been informed of by the Athletics New York team, and from what my friend Christian Hennig, an English sports journalist who lives in New York, has told me, there are similarities between Sims's game and Redmond's game at the moment. So in the piece I wrote for the Athletic, it looked as if, while the move didn't make much sense on, you know, at first glance, to send, you know, a very promising winger over to the MLS for 6 months, it's become very apparent that Sims was sent over to New York Red Bull because of the New York links, and how Hasenhuttl is trying to get more players to play at clubs that have this sort of belief in young players that play high pressing football. And of course, the best ones to do that are the ones that Hasenhuttl knows, which are the, you know, Red Bull clubs. So hence the move. And from what I understand, there was a recent performance in which Sims got his first assist, where his running and passing movement was not too dissimilar from the role Nathan Redmond had, particularly in Redmond's game against Brighton. So you can sort of acclimatize for the changes in the MLS and you know, pressing systems and whatnot, and how obviously MLS is probably more comparable to the football found in certain sides in the Championship than it is in the Premier League. But I think Sims's place when he returns will eventually be to play, I want to say, on the right-hand side of the 4-2-2-2. It's one of those really interesting things where Southampton seem to be getting stronger and stronger in the wide areas. So very conceivably, Southampton could have a front four of Danny Ings and Shea Adams up front. And then on the left and right, you've got Moussa Djenepo and Nathan Redmond. And then as substitute options, you've got Boufal and Josh Sims. And then you've also got the addition of James Ward-Prowse if he needs to fill in there, which, I don't know about you, I would say that's a top half quality of attack. So things are going well, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? That whole kind of like Red Bull connection and the fact that all the teams kind of play in that similar style. You know, should we be thinking that Saints might be bought out by Red Bull at some point in the future? Is like Hasenhuttl the plant, the first man in to try and sort things out?
It's a thing that football writers try and predict every season, sort of when will Red Bull finally buy in England.
Yeah. And
I think there were some very serious moves made by Red Bull around about Swindon in the last 18 months. But as far as I know, there's been no sort of formal agreement between Red Bull and the football club. I think if such a deal happens, there will be national news and someone far more talented than me at The Athletic will pass comment about it. I think what we've got now is there's a very interesting informal passage of personnel between the Red Bull clubs and Southampton. So Richard Klipp, I'm going to try and pronounce his surname. Ralph says I'm getting closer. So it's Kitch Blitzer, the new first team assistant, formerly of Red Bull Salzburg. And when I've asked Ralph about his assistant's role, he says we come from the same family, this Red Bull family. So that's one personnel member who's got Red Bull experience. And obviously, last week, Southampton lost one member of their performance analysis team to Red Bull, to New York Red Bull as well. So there seems to be some sort of passage between the clubs and Southampton, largely because Hasenhuttl knows a large number of those personnel, and they seem to be playing the type of football Hasenhuttl was trying to bring through. So I'd expect more links between the Red Bull clubs and Southampton to come forward in future. However, nothing too formal, if not because Southampton's official energy drinks partner is Monster.
Yeah, I mean that would be a little bit awkward, wouldn't it, if Red Bull bought them out at the moment and then they still had to have Monster on the stands at the same time. Well, maybe this is something. Maybe Hasenhuttl is actually on a spy on a covert mission to ruin Southampton for selecting Monster as the energy drink of the club. Anyway, I'm getting way too deep into ridiculous conspiracy theories now. I wonder, seeing as we've kind of touched on this as part of the Red Bull discussion, should we talk about Ross Wilson now as well, because it's been announced that he's leaving for Rangers. Earlier this season we had Danny Rowe left Southampton to join Bayern Munich, and there seem to be a lot of fans who are worried that the reason that Southampton are not performing as they should do is because Danny Rowe left. They're worried about I've forgotten the lady's name who's moving to Red Bull, but should we be worried about what's going on in the back room and Ross Wilson leaving now as well?
I think backroom movements at Southampton are... So the departure of Danny Rowe was a particularly interesting one because, as far as I understand, it was a open secret he was leaving, but it was only formally announced at the start of the season. So my understanding was quite a few Southampton fans here knew that Rowe was not having was not appearing in Southampton as much as he used to, but they went through a full round of preseason, and then it was only at the start of the season where it got formally announced. The interesting with Roll is I don't think he's been properly replaced yet. So while Richard, I'm going to call him Richard for the sake of not embarrassing myself anymore. While Richard has the job of first team assistant coach, my understanding is he has a remit to cover video analysis and very much do it in regards to the opposition. So he's not a traditional number two in the way that those who grew up with Nigel Clough might remember how a number two operates, or he's not an assistant manager in the same way as a Mike Phelan at Manchester United, or as a my brain's gone blank, Mikel Arteta at Manchester City. He seems to very much have a very fixed role, and that seems to be of the auditorium rather than to be the sounding board to affect things. One thing that I would say is particularly interesting is if you ever want to see the influence of an assistant manager on a manager, just notice if there's been any change in the way substitutes happen.
Okay. In
the team. So obviously, the assistant very often is the immediate sounding board for subs. So it doesn't appear to me that Ralph has changed his approach to substitutes since Richard has joined. He's still making substitutes around about the same moments, around about the 60th, 7th moment. He still wants to always bring on Stuart Armstrong to close out games. And he still hasn't quite got a hang of what I call game changers or game-changing substitutions. So there hasn't been much change there. And from the 2 or 3 times I have mentioned Richard to Hasenhuttl, he said that Richard's very, very good. He helps me out a lot with analysis work. He very much helps me out in the auditorium when we're having press conferences and talking about stuff. But it doesn't seem to be much in terms of the meat and potatoes job you'd assume with coaching. So that may be a point of concern if the form of the club seems to go down. It might be worth me asking or someone else asking some questions about who is talking to Ralph and saying maybe don't do this. Yeah. Or who's being the good cop to Ralph's bad cop, if Ralph is a bad cop at all. From my understanding, he seems to be a very well balanced cop. So there's that. In terms of Ross Wilson's departure, I believe the best way I can frame this is Ross Wilson leaving is more of a case of someone getting their dream job than it is Southampton moving on someone. We know for a fact Ross Wilson was very close to joining Rangers in 2017, and I believe there was one more approach from Rangers between then and the present day, and essentially it's been conversations over how much money is going to be made available to Ross Wilson that sort of finally got this deal over the line. And from what I understand, Southampton, and in the club statement that went out today, Southampton, Ross Wilson's going with the blessing of everyone at Southampton. So I don't think there's any issue there with his departure. What I would say is Ross Wilson's departure probably opens up the gap for Gao Xingchen and the family to formally begin a new era and draw a line under the Les Reed and Ralph Kruger era, and to take Southampton to something more in keeping with their vision. So they get to hire their own director of football in order to go along with Ralph Hasenhuttl, who was their own hire as well, and sort of take this governance board to someplace new. So you've got to bear in mind, as far as I understand it, Southampton is run by a group of individuals. So CEO Martin Semmens runs the club on a day-to-day basis. You've got Toby Steele, who's the managing director. There is the commercial director, whose name I currently forget. Please forgive me. Then there is Gao and Gao's daughter Nelly. Gao's daughter Nelly has more of the day-to-day running than Chairman Gao, who obviously lives in China still. And then Ralph Hasenhuttl feeds into that conversation a lot, in addition with Ross Wilson. The departure of Wilson means that Hasenhuttl in the interim will have a little bit more conversation on the running of player recruitment and the scouting system and the academy system. But I imagine the director of football, Hasenhuttl, will be consulted about the incoming director of football, and they'll try and get a director of football who can work alongside Hasenhuttl quite easily. So there's a very good chance there'll be another former Red Bull member at Southampton very, very soon.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite interesting then, isn't it? I mean, going back to your point about the Danny Roll leaving and Richard, as we call him on this podcast, not being there for the sounding board, is that sometimes from the outside, it certainly looked like Ralph hasn't had a sounding board who he's testing his ideas against, and he's been going for his kind of craziest idea. At this point, let's bring it back to the football, because I've got a couple of questions from my co-host Tom Parker, who wanted me to ask you. And his first question is, what else does Ralph have in his kind of like locker to improve the team? He's signed the players, changed formations, but we still have those vulnerabilities at the back, and we're still wasteful at the front.
I'd say he has to play the players. I really think he has to play the players. Like I've said, I think Southampton's two best centre-backs are Benerick and Kevin Danza, and I've not seen them play together in a back two. I think if for some reason I was the assistant manager of Southampton for a weekend against Wolves, I'd probably go to Ralph, look, let's try a 4-2-2-2, the one you always want to play it, but let's do it with Angus Gunn in goal, Bertrand left back, Valerie right back, Benerick and Danzo centre back. Let's try Romeo and James Ward-Prowse in central midfield. For some reason, I've got a magic potion. I've given that to Moussa Djenepo, so I'm going to put him on the left. Let's put Nathan Redmond on the right, and let's try Shea Adams and Danny Ings up top. I think that is a team that could beat Wolves. I think that's a team that could beat more than half of the teams in the Premier League. And I think that's a case of how does Southampton get better? You basically got to, one, wait for Moussa Djenepo to be fit along with the other players, and then hope, play your best 11, which I think Ralph hasn't done yet due to circumstances to do with player form and injury.
And do you think that's where he's working towards? Because I'd probably agree with you. I think there's maybe some question marks around James Ward-Prowse and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, but I've not been particularly impressed with Højbjerg this season so far. Having said that, I've not been hugely impressed with James Ward-Prowse this season so far either, but I think there's maybe more to come from James Ward-Prowse.
Yes, so James Ward-Prowse has primarily played at right wing back or right wing for Southampton, which I believe is not the best use of his talent. So for the majority of the time where there is someone else playing on the right wing, be it Boufal, Valerie, or player X, the player on the right tends to play a bit wider and tends to play a little bit deeper than the person playing on the left, because in theory, the centre midfielder, who is James Ward-Prowse, tends to burst forward and get ahead of the ball and play as a number 10 and play quite a few 1-2s. When James Ward-Prowse plays out wide, there is no one from the central midfield pivot to burst forward. And I think this is a really big problem they've got at central midfield in Southampton right now. Romeo is very good at the things he's good at. He's not very good at attacking. Romeo wants to defend, get turnovers, tackle people, and eventually get a booking and give it to someone more talented than him. And when that person more talented than him going forward is on form and can do more 1-2s with Danny Ings, with Redmond, with Bertrand, then Southampton's attack begins to click. At the moment, Højbjerg has not really been making the passes in the final third that you'd expect, has not really been getting the shots off that you'd hope him to get. So it's created much of a muchness in centre midfield. The incident I brought up after the Chelsea game was Romeo and Ings teamed up to dispossess Willian. Romeo gave the ball to Ings on the halfway line. Ings started running, but Romeo stopped.
Yeah.
And it's not quite Romeo's fault, because Romeo is not an attacking player. He can try and join a counter-attack, but you don't want him shooting the ball. Romeo did his job and gave it to someone more attacking-minded. What you wanted was someone else attacking-minded to join that attack. And you'd hope that to be Højbjerg, but Højbjerg right now can't quite seem to do that. Whether or not this is a problem that you can remedy by playing 3 in midfield, so someone played a 4-3-3 against Chelsea, and maybe try Romeo, Højbjerg, and Ward-Prowse and tell Ward-Prowse to play a bit more attacking and try and get ahead of the ball and play 1-2s, that might work. I think going in, the transfer market for January for a loan deal could be particularly interesting for Southampton. I think Tom Davies at Everton would be a particularly interesting recruitment if they can sort out the finances there. I think Southampton could really do with someone in central midfield whose job is pass the ball forwards at all times. And don't worry about the rest, because Romeo will sort that out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's causing a bit of a headache for Ralph at the moment, because Højbjerg is the captain, and perhaps he'd be worried about dropping the captain. Højbjerg as well also seems like quite an emotional player to me, and he seems that his emotions are quite strongly linked to the rest of the first team as well. I mean, that's just from an outside point of view, but I wonder if he's almost kind of like treading on eggshells around that issue. Højbjerg cares about Southampton. I think his reaction in the South Coast derby especially marked him out as a man who cares intensely about Southampton, who very much takes his role as captain very seriously, who wants to do best for the team, and is trying his best. I wouldn't say he's had a bad spell for Southampton. I'd simply say he is playing a very, very difficult role in central midfield in the Premier League at a time where being a good Premier League central midfield is really, really, really hard. There are maybe a dozen central midfielders, I'd say, who are good in that position and are totally in control of the helter-skelter movement of the Premier League. And I'd say there are teams, in the top 6 with central midfields who are struggling. And I'd say Southampton have, in Højbjerg and in Romeo especially, 2 players who are easily of European quality, and that can play really well. You only have to look at the performance against Manchester United to see what's a very good double pivot Southampton have. I think it's simply a case of finding the right alchemy to get someone to be ahead of the ball and stitch that midfield with that attack. Okay. So I'm going to press you on this now. So if Ralph Hasenhuttl the right manager, playing the right sort of tactics, and the players are the right sort of players who, should be able to kind of be breaking into that Europa League or kind of Premier League middle class, what is it that is wrong? Is it the consistency? Is it the stadium at home, the atmosphere? Is it just bad luck? Is there going to be a sudden turn in form that we can foresee?
The way I always describe it is, you've got good teams, you've got bad teams, you have lucky teams, and you have unlucky teams. And a good team will be top half. A good team that's also lucky will tend to win a trophy. A bad team will be bottom half, and a bad team that's unlucky will tend to be at the bottom of the table. At the moment, Southampton are the unluckiest lucky side in the Premier League. It's a very, very weird combination of things. And I pointed this out when I wrote about VAR decisions with Southampton. So VAR's overturned more goals against Southampton than any other club in the Premier League. And I thought, it's just because Hasenhuttl was doing something particularly good in coaching. And it was just simply no, because Southampton just seemed to be getting the rub of the green on some offside decisions. So that's the sort of luck that's a good form of luck, but also you prefer it to be. That's a form of luck that you prefer your team to be good rather than just lucky. And I think there's been 2 or 3 times where Southampton are playing good football for 25 to 30 minutes, and the opposition goes, all right, now we're going to be lucky and have a shot, and it goes in.
Yeah.
And there've been 2 or 3 times where it's first chance goal for the opposition or first set piece goal. So Nathan Ake's goal against Bournemouth was just a corner, and Ake went, I'm free. I'm gonna have this and go in. At a time when Southampton had maybe 20 minutes worth of good football. There was a very impressive 15 minutes against Tottenham Hotspur, and then Harry Kane and Son went, shall we just score now? And then Son got the assist in Dombele. I think that's happening. It's a really, really unfortunate fixture list, which is making Southampton look worse than they are. And also, there are things that unfortunately you can't quite account for. So Shea Adams having 12 shots on goal and none of them going in is one of those things where you're going, Shea Adams will eventually start scoring. And there is no reason for Shea Adams to not have scored already. Every single statistical model indicates Shea Adams is a good striker who is going through a bizarre glitch right now. And when Shea Adams starts scoring, that's one more reason for Southampton fans to be happy about. And this is the case of, can one day Southampton have a game where Shea Adams scores a goal and also Vestergaard gets his headers right, so then Southampton don't concede. And then once you do that, you get 2 or 3 wins in a row.
So what you're saying Southampton fans should do is just grit their teeth, hold on, and just wait. Probably till the end of November when we hit the run of Watford, Norwich, Newcastle, West Ham, Villa, and that's going to be when things will start working out.
Yes, I think so. So I am of the school of thought that you shouldn't really look at the Premier League table until the second international break, which is now. Other football writers don't particularly pay attention to the league table until after 10 games of the season. And Ralph Hasenhuttl was told press that he's not looking at the league table until Southampton have played everyone once. I think that might have to run for a bit until Southampton get until November 30th, where they're playing Watford and then they play Norwich. It is a really, really, really painful fixture list. And on one hand, you hope Southampton keep their goal difference in a good enough, healthy enough state, so when the fixtures list is a bit nicer to them, they can start arresting their slide down the table. There is no reason for Southampton to be worrying about the R word yet. I think they've got a front 4 which, when fully fit, is not far off Europa League standards. They've got 2 people in central midfield who, when fully fit and firing, are not far off top 6 standard. I think the back 4 or back 5 definitely could do with some improvement, but that improvement comes with consistency and comes from extra experience and communication. I think once Hasenhuttl picks his eventual back 5 or his eventual back 4, he should stick with it. So what I'd really like to see is a run of games of someone playing with Bednarek. I'd really like to see Angus Gunn remain as the number one. I wouldn't want to see him replaced by McCarthy just yet. I think one of the things about playing young players in defence is that while there is a temptation to go with experience and an older player, you can sometimes compensate with that experience by having young players grow up with each other. And I think replacing Gunn right now just adds further instability. I want to come back on this podcast just at the start of December, and then hopefully everything should be all right.
Okay, all right, that's a deal, Carl. We'll get you in start of December, maybe after that Norwich game, or maybe even after we've had Watford, Norwich, Newcastle, and then we should know kind of where we are, I think, as a club and where we're going. And I think you've probably kind of answered this question already, but like, what can we realistically expect to achieve over the course of the season? Because I was feeling really optimistic. I think I kind of predicted probably about the same as you, about 12th, but with a lot of good performances and some, quite interesting football. Do you think that's still right?
Yeah, I still think 12th is within reach. My big old powerful spreadsheet is now predicting something closer to 14th. Especially now, it seems like Crystal Palace have decided to be a good football team, which is weird. But I think it's simply a case of just let's find a way to get Shea Adams firing. So Redmond coming back to fitness should really help play the sort of through balls and slide rule passes that Shea Adams scored quite a lot of in the Championship last season. Shea Adams starts scoring, working alongside Danny Ings leading the front press should really, really help. A little bit of work on set pieces. So Maya Yoshida's had two very good presentable chances, one against Liverpool and one against Tottenham Hotspur. If Southampton can really work on that sort of attacking performance on set pieces, then there's another source of goals there. Southampton have to get better, if only because you've got two or three players coming in to full fitness and two or three players who are going to start performing as they're, closer to what their underlying numbers are in keeping of. It's not a case of Southampton are incredibly vulnerable to one sort of thing that teams can do over and over and over again. Things should get better. Yeah. And I'm saying this with my most serious face on.
Okay. You didn't sound 100% convinced with yourself when you said that. And then let's just have a quick look towards this weekend's game away to Wolverhampton Wanderers. Do you expect Southampton to get anything from this? I mean, Wolves were pretty impressive against Manchester City at the weekend. They seem to have turned the corner from their early season poor form. It's probably our timing is not great here. We should have been at Wolves earlier in the season.
It would have been nice. This fixture list, I don't know what gods Southampton offended for this fixture list, but Wolves are going to be a really interesting thing because Wolves at the start of this season were playing quite ineffectual football because they were playing like a Europa League side, whereas Wolves were at their most successful last season and were at their most successful against Manchester City the other week because they were playing still like a recently promoted side. So Wolves are a team that are very comfortable with the opposition having the majority of the ball. They're going, all right, you pass yourself City with 65% possession. We will sit back. We will defend quite ably. We've got two very tall centre-backs so we can deal with crosses. And we can set a number of very, very good traps for you to eventually lose possession and we get turnovers. And then we counter-attack at pace with also Adama Traore as right wing back or as a central striker. This is one reason why Manchester United are rubbish against Wolves, because Wolves are the most presentable team for Manchester United to lose to, because United go there thinking they can just bully them with passes and Wolves just sit there waiting. So if Southampton go to Wolves expecting to have all the ball and play this sort of sterile possession game that they've done quite often, there's a good chance they lose, especially considering how good Wolves are at counter-attacking, how quick Traore is, and how vulnerable Southampton have appeared to balls over the top, especially with Vestergaard or Yoshida, who aren't the speediest centre-backs. So that's something to be very wary of. However, if Southampton go out there with a focus on causing loads of turnovers and trying to match Wolves' quite narrow shape in the central midfield options. If Romeo and Højbjerg can really start battling Moutinho and Neves, then we could have a particularly interesting thing. I think if they could start getting some through balls over to Shea Adams, and Shea Adams can really begin to stretch that Wolves back five or back three, then there could be some very, very interesting things there. And I think if Benarek is given the correct centre-back partner, then you could see a really interesting matchup. The optimist in me is predicting a 2-2 draw. The pessimist in me is predicting a very workmanlike 2-0 victory for Wolves.
I predicted a 2-2 draw for the Wolves podcast, partly because I never think you should give an opposition podcast the satisfaction of predicting your team to lose. So 2-2 draw is what I went for as well. So that's a good prediction, Carl. I'll take that.
Yeah, I think someone need to be careful about set pieces, especially right-sided in-swinging corners. And they do need to worry about Traore in the wide positions. However, I think the way Southampton play football in wide areas and how they bring over the front six in order to box players out is the perfect way to stop a instinctual, rapid player like Traore. So hopefully, if Southampton can get goals going, they should be well. The first goal is the most important one here, yeah. I very much believe.
Okay. So, Carl, one last question before we finish. Moving on from Southampton, I know that you're a Manchester United fan, and I think that you might be suffering as we are at the moment. What is going on with Manchester United?
They're not very good, is the succinct answer. The longer answer is Southampton, Manchester United are reaping what they sow, which is when you have a lack of a long-term plan and lurch from one tactical vision to another tactical vision, you eventually come up short and you end up in this space. I think there are some very interesting parallels between Southampton following the departure of Ronald Koeman and Manchester United now. Sort of, they had a plan. It changed quite rapidly, and then two or three very important components got stripped from Manchester United, and now Manchester United look incredibly pathetic, shall we say. They've got a defence that isn't particularly solid at best. A central midfield, which Pogba aside, is not European quality. I think every member of Southampton's midfield three, James Ward-Prowse, Romeo and Højbjerg, would improve Manchester United's midfield, which is odd to say. And they've got an attack where the players, when they are fit, can do well, but they're not, because Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has mishandled his resources available to him and overworked them during the summer by trying to get them to play a pressing game. But from what I understand, didn't have plans of a pressing game and just simply made them run a lot harder. Let me be very, very blunt here. Ralph Hasenhuttl is a far more talented manager than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is. In a director of football in Ross Wilson, in having a director of football like Ross Wilson, Southampton have better long-term planning than Manchester United. In a defensive midfield like Ori or like Romeo, Southampton have a better defensive midfield option than Manchester United. This is not me saying Southampton are a really, really good side, and please don't get too angry that I'm using Southampton as a stick to beat Manchester United with. But yeah, that's what's going on with Manchester United. That they were once a market leader and now they're behind a club like Southampton, which, no disrespect, are not in the same financial realm as Manchester United. But if a team like Southampton can have greater forward planning and a better coach than Manchester United, then Manchester United's fall was plain to see for everyone, really.
Yeah. So, quick question. I think I know the answer to this because you've just said it. I mean, if Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got sacked, would you be happy if Man United appointed Ralph Hasenhuttl?
Yes.
Yeah. And
I don't think he'd get the job, and I don't think he'd want the responsibility of managing a top six club that is Manchester United. I think Manchester United are in such a state of disarray. It would take a very unique manager to take over there, and they would quite easily argue that they'd need a lot of money, both personally and in the transfer market. But in my mind, Ralph Hasenhuttl, if you airdrop Ralph Hasenhuttl into Manchester United today, Manchester United will be playing better football come 2 weeks from now, simply because Ralph Hasenhuttl has a clearer vision of the football he's trying to play at Southampton. When I watch Manchester United in a personal capacity, now I go, I have no idea what type of football they're trying to play. Whereas, no matter what's happened watching Southampton, I go, oh, okay, Southampton are doing this and this and this because Ralph Hasenhuttl wants them to do this and this, which is one of those things that sounds very, very simple, but you'd be surprised how many clubs there are in the Premier League that you don't understand what they're trying to do, but Southampton do, which is one reason why I think Southampton fans shouldn't be too worried. I mean, one only has to look at Everton to look at a club with more money that has no idea what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And who would you want to have? Do you want Mauricio Pochettino?
Yes. I said this before. My number one choice last season was Jardim from Monaco, because I believe Jardim had a very, very good choice with working with you and working with experienced players and squeezing out that extra bit like Falcao. And I want to say Fabinho at Monaco, but Monaco has sank a bit. But I very much believe Manchester United should have approached Pochettino in the summer, if not because they wanted Pochettino, but simply because they wanted to ruin Tottenham Hotspur. There's a very good sporting adage from Bayern Munich which says strengthen yourself, and if you can't do that, weaken others. And I think in the cutthroat nature of the top six, even if you don't, sometimes it's not about you having it. Sometimes it's about making sure the other person doesn't have it, which is an awful capitalist thing for me to say, but Barclays.
I always felt like that's what Liverpool used to do with Southampton. We used to throw up annoying results for them, and I just thought, he's caused another annoying result against us. Let's go and buy him. Right. Anyway, on that note, Carl, we've been speaking for over an hour now, so I need to let you get back to your other life of covering Southampton in the written word rather than the spoken word. Thank you once again. I will absolutely take you up on your offer to get you on to the podcast after Saints have had a few easier fixtures in early December. That seems like quite a good time to get you back on again. Thank you very much for speaking to us again. And just a reminder to our fans that if they want to read your stuff, they need to get themselves on theathletic.com and subscribe to that. If you want to email into the Saints FC podcast, saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com. It's bye-bye from me, and Carl, I'll let you say your farewells as well.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We've got a number of discount deals on the Athletic at the moment due to the recruitments of Ornstein and David Ornstein and Daniel Taylor from The Guardian. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There's a number of deals, so you don't have to pay full price at the moment if you're a bit skeptical. Coming up this week will be a piece on Ross Wilson, possibly a look at Southampton player programs and matchday programs going forward, and then one other look at a former Southampton player if I find enough time this week. But other than that, I will see you at Molineux on Saturday, everyone. As is tradition, I'll be dressed in green trousers, which is my sort of, if you see someone walking around the football stadium involving Southampton wearing green trousers, it's me. So come say hello.
Great.
I look forward to seeing you soon. All right.
Thanks a lot, Carl. Cheerio,
right,
everyone.